Do you ever worry you're on the wrong side of history because you're consistently siding with and defending bullies?
Yeah, I'll tell you what happens. You know, people like you, Skylar, only ever watch the videos that are supporting the speech of people you don't like, and you ignore it when I make videos defending the speech of people on your side because it's not sensational enough for you.
I'm not super familiar with your videos. It doesn't show up in my suggested feed. Start with this. YouTube, right? First, let me ask you. Let me let you speak in your own words. Why do you have a problem with the current practices of social media?
Well, if one side is being removed from the conversation by a massive multi-billion-dollar national corporation with no accountability, then our society is going to be dictated by small. Well, it's very simple. Mark Zuckerberg is not the president of the United States, nor is Sundar Pichai, but they are certainly exercising international ideas over Americans. So if, you know, these big tech companies can't be held to account, if they dominate the market, if they restrict legal speech, you're going to end up with a repressive, technocratic, fascistic government. I don't think anybody wants that, right? So, you know, we want to address it before it gets too bad, and it's already pretty bad.
Wow, there was a lot of adjectives there. Color me impressed. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I would imagine that stems from obviously being more classical, liberal. This idea of you being anti-censorship would be pro-freedom, pro-liberty to an extent.
Oh, yeah.
So then, let me ask you this. Why should YouTube, a private company, be forced to carry someone on their platform? For example, recently there was we'll get into that Vox with Carlos Mazza and Stephen Crowder. Why should YouTube be forced to act as a mouthpiece? Why all of a sudden when it comes to private companies like YouTube are you looking for big government regulation?
It depends on scale. And, you know, a lot of these issues with free speech there's a nuance here, right? It's not necessarily that every single platform, everywhere, every single time should be forced to carry speech. But YouTube's definitely dominated online video in terms of user-generated content. There's no other game in town. Sure, Vimeo kind of exists, but through various business practices, you know, YouTube has come out on top. So if you really want to reach people and have your voice be heard, or, you know, allow people to actually subscribe and follow your content, whether or not YouTube promotes it, YouTube is where you have to be. So because they've started to dominate a massive portion of the market, they're starting to have negative effects on our public discourse.
And by the way, it was built by our audience. We asked them when we switched over from TV to online, can you guys help us build this? And our audience gave us $425,000 to build it.
What's this bullshit? What's going on here? I thought we were having a reasonable discussion. That's not the real change. That's bullshit. I'm the real change over here. This is supposed to happen on the SJW Marriott.
Okay, this is Stephen
This
Crowder.
isn't the real change. You think you're a man and it's not happening. It's bullshit. You know, you come out and start the panel.
Okay, so this is
This
is not a friend of mine.
What he does, okay?
This is what he does.
He's doing an impression, and you know that's bullshit. Okay?
Okay,
Right?
He basically
what he does,
makes
right?
money.
If he makes money,
by
he lies, right?
riding my
He's dick. He rides my dick. So I do this homophobic stuff too, right? And I go, and then I feel like you're a homophobe.
Whereas the commons, this idea of this public space where we could gather, used to be in the real world. It's not just YouTube, it's Twitter, it's Facebook. These platforms are having a serious impact, and we know they are because we constantly hear about Russia interfering in our elections. So if that's true, then we need protections for U.S. citizens to allow them to speak. Otherwise, their rights will be stripped away by billionaires who don't know or care about them. Whether or not YouTube promotes your content is very different from whether or not they host your content and allow people to find it. So on the right side of YouTube, you have that recommendation bar. That to me seems more like a privilege, not a right. But there are a lot of people who have broken no rules who find their channels put in what's called a limited state, meaning that people can't even search for it anymore, which effectively removes it. So that's a suppression of someone's speech.
And you see that as a problem.
Oh, really? You know, I guess you
So security should remove him because his whole living. But by the way, look at the strength of live streams. He makes a living by trying to copy me.
I know, right?
And get the right-wing critics.
And the thing
Be
is,
like,
like,
hey, look, I'm will you please watch me? Is he so big that I'm just going to hide on?
I know, you know, like, right, listen, you know, like there was a time, I mean, live stream was getting divided. It's like cable, right? It's like there's lower numbers and, okay.
Hey.
So if they're going to suppress legal speech in this country based on some international standard that doesn't apply to Americans, but there's nowhere else for Americans to go, and they are dominating the conversation, then some kind of restriction has to guarantee speech.
I know, right? Like, I know, like, this guy is right in my dick! It's bullshit! It's bullshit going around my dick! We're trying to reasonable discussion.
And this is probably the perfect example of why any kind of restrictions on speech, particularly when they say it's hate speech, is so insidious. I did a video commenting on publicly available information. But because the story was damaging to this massive billion-dollar corporation, apparently, this is my understanding, right? So this is where we're at so far in the story. I haven't reported this yet, but it seems like a legal firm filed a privacy complaint, and YouTube just takes the content down, even though it's public. So this is a massive legal firm with probably hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions, I don't know, getting journalism taken down by lying, essentially, or putting pressure on YouTube.
And to be clear, for people who don't know, this information was made public by James O'Keefe, so they can check the sources for themselves.
Right. So James O'Keefe does an expose, and he
let's call it that. Yeah.
Well, yeah. You don't have to like the guy, but he had a whistleblower on the record. And if you don't want to trust James, you can trust the guy who did get fired from Pinterest saying this happened. Okay. Now, if you want to argue that journalism violates someone's privacy, I think you're wrong. But James O'Keefe did publish someone's name. I still think James O'Keefe is in the right on that issue. But then it gets even crazier when I'm simply commenting on what everyone already knows, and they still say you cannot do that. Now you have massive unaccountable companies, like no one elected Pinterest to determine what beliefs you're allowed to have, but they are suppressing information. And once people found out, because regulation is coming, Pinterest then acts in the interest, or I should say YouTube and these other platforms, because even Twitter took down James O'Keefe's videos. They're protecting each other as far as I'm concerned.
Get off stage, man. Get off stage. I just want to. Oh, no, don't do it. No, bro. I know. You're upset about it. It's cool.
First they come for you, then they come for me.
Well, then why would you defend someone like a Stephen Crowder, right? With a smaller guy like Carlos Maza and he had less than 100,000 followers. And that's a clear example of Crowder obviously had violated terms of service by making hateful content, which YouTube said, and a big channel with almost 4 million subscribers going after a lifelong LGBTQ advocate. How's that not a prime example of
Well,
bullying?
First, YouTube said Stephen didn't break any rules.
Well, they demonetized him, so
they did, right? And because he caused, in their view, they said it was harmful to the community. But here's the bigger problem: would you prefer it if Carlos Maza was banned from Twitter and YouTube? Is that what you're advocating for? Because Carlos Maza has repeatedly done the exact same thing. In fact, one of the big problems is, first of all, I understand comedy, right? I'm a big fan of George Carlin, and George Carlin he had this bit in the early 90s where he used every racial slur in the book and said, it's not the words, it's the person behind the words you've got to be worried about. And the reason why that's so important is that Carlos Maza used those words on himself. If we held everyone to the same standard, Carlos Maza would have been banned from YouTube way before Stephen Crowder ever got to the point of criticizing him.
And it's bullshit, okay? It's not like when I say bullshit, or it's like the word like it's real talk. It's like we're uncensored.
Okay, so
what's this guy's real name?
Stephen Crowder. But
I'm Jake.
That's exactly what he wanted.
That's exactly what he wanted.
That's why Alex Jones came on
I know.
and said,
That's the thing.
show's
It's
small.
like the right wing guy.
So
Like, come on,
he wants to come on a larger show. So that you can say,
These activists, what they've done with Crowder is they've gone through 2 years worth of content and snipped together all of these out of context times he said certain things. But YouTube realized when you watch the full segment, it was a passing moment and it wasn't targeting Carlos specifically based on those traits. It was just him talking about something and then mentioning the identity of Maza. By all means, you can be mad at Crowder for doing that. I'm willing to listen to your opinion. But we go back and look at what Carlos Maza is saying, throw milkshakes at people. And he actually, and again, I want to clarify, I didn't confirm this tweet yet, but it's going around now because Maza has repeatedly referred to various minorities.
Seems like there's a lot of that in your content, if I may say, a lot of unconfirmed screenshots and tweets. But, listen, No,
that's actually not true at all.
No,
I maybe less than.
I would say agree to disagree, but only if there was even a slight chance that I was incorrect, which we know is not the case here.
You are, yeah, because I actually use NewsGuard, which is a third-party rating agency I actually have great disagreements with, but I use it on purpose as a check on my own personal bias. So yes, everything I use is confirmed.
I'm
Well,
not as
don't
familiar with
use-
NewsGuard. I tend to reference Vice and Vox quite a bit. Let me ask
Well,
you.
I was the founding member of Vice News, so you'll probably trust me in that regard, right?
No, well, good for you. People who have been in historically positions of power and oppression, people like yourself, people like Stefan Crowder, people like those in the
me.
alt-right, people like those, who we see at...
What is that? What do you mean by people like me?
Well, people like white males in the United States.
So wait. Are you making a derogatory comment on my mixed race heritage? Is that what you mean by people like you?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. This is the part where you pull out the trump card that you have, that somewhere in your 23andMe, there's enough Korean for me to
mom?
give you a pass and consider you
Korean mom?
Well, listen, let's be honest that the Koreans haven't been the same kind of oppressed class in the United States. What we agree is LGBTQ, as trans people in the United States today, or black people given slavery. Have Koreans been slaves in the United States?